My name is Morgan Barrett and I lived perfectly for 3 years just to destroy the people who killed my parents. The morning I found the truth, I was arranging white roses in my mother-in-law's favorite crystal vase. My hands were steady, my smile was warm, and my heart was plotting murder. Before I continue, I like this video and subscribe to this channel if you love listening to revenge stories. We bring you daily revenge stories that will inspire you. Enjoy listening. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I had come home early from my volunteer work at the Children's Hospital. Another carefully crafted piece of my perfect daughter-in-law image. The Blackwood mansion was quiet, which meant my husband Marcus was still at his law firm and his parents were having their afternoon tea in the study. As I climbed the marble staircase to change clothes, I heard Eleanor Blackwood's voice drifting from the slightly open study door. Her tone was different from the sweet maternal voice she used with me. This voice was cold, businesslike. "The Barrett property development is finally complete," she was saying. "20 million profit just as we projected. Worth every penny we spent on that little accident 3 years ago." I stopped breathing. "Eleanor, keep your voice down," came the deeper voice of my father-in-law, Richard Blackwood. "Morgan could come home early. Please. That girl is so grateful to be part of our family. She'd never suspect anything. Poor orphan, so lucky to marry our Marcus." Eleanor's laugh was like breaking glass. If she only knew we arranged her parents' car accident to get their land, she might not be so eager to please. The crystal vase slipped from my hands and shattered on the marble floor, but I barely heard it. The sound was nothing compared to the explosion happening inside my chest. My parents. My sweet, hardworking parents who had built their small construction business from nothing. Who had owned 50 acres of prime development land that they'd planned to leave to me someday. Who had died in what police called a tragic brake failure on a rainy night 3 years ago. They hadn't died in an accident. They had been murdered. By my husband's family. The people I called mom and dad now. The people I had been trying so desperately to please and make proud. I stood there in the hallway, pieces of crystal around my feet like stars, and felt something inside me break that would never heal. The Morgan who had been grateful and loving and eager to belong died in that moment. What took her place was something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. "Morgan, darling, are you all right?" Eleanor's voice came from behind me, sweet and concerned again. I turned to see her standing in the study doorway, her silver hair perfectly styled, her blue eyes full of fake worry. "I dropped your vase," I said softly, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. "I'm so sorry, Mom." The word tasted like poison now. "Oh, don't worry about that old thing," she said, rushing over to help me pick up the pieces. "Are you hurt? Let me see your hands." As she examined my palms for cuts, I studied her face. How had I never noticed the coldness behind her smile? How had I missed the calculation in her touch? "I'm fine," I said. "Just clumsy today. We all have those days, dear. Why don't you rest? You look pale." I nodded and walked upstairs to the bedroom I shared with Marcus, closing the door softly behind me. Then I sat on the edge of our king-size bed and cried silently for exactly 10 minutes. I allowed myself that much grief for my dead parents and my dead innocence. After 10 minutes, I wiped my eyes, fixed my makeup, and began planning how to destroy the Blackwood family. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life. Every morning I had to wake up next to Marcus and pretend I still loved him. Every evening I had to sit at dinner with his parents and pretend I was grateful for their kindness. Every moment I had to be the perfect daughter-in-law while my heart burned with hatred. But I was learning. I had always been smart. That's how I'd earned my business degree, how I'd caught Marcus's attention at a charity gala, how I'd won over his parents. Now I turned that intelligence toward understanding everything about the Blackwood empire. Richard Blackwood owned one of the largest real estate development companies in the state. Eleanor managed their charitable foundation, which gave them access to wealthy donors and politicians. Marcus was being groomed to take over the business someday. Me. I was their perfect secret weapon. The sweet, humble daughter-in-law who charmed everyone at business dinners. The one who remembered every client's birthday, every investor's favorite drink, every politician's wife's name. They had no idea they had invited a viper into their nest. I started small. During family dinners, I would ask innocent questions about the business. Oh, that must have been challenging to get the permit so quickly. Or, how clever of you to buy that land right before they announced the highway project. They loved explaining their success to me. They were so proud of their ruthless efficiency, their ability to eliminate obstacles. They just never mentioned that sometimes those obstacles were human beings. I learned about their methods. How they bribed city officials for insider information. How they used shell companies to hide their involvement in suspicious land deals. How they had a network of mechanics, contractors, and other professionals who could arrange accidents when necessary. My parents hadn't been their first victims. They wouldn't be their last unless I stopped them. 6 months after I learned the truth, I put my plan into motion. First, I needed evidence. The Blackwoods were careful, but they had grown comfortable around me. They talked freely during family dinners, left documents on Richard's desk, took phone calls in front of me. I started recording everything. I bought a small digital recorder and hid it in my purse during family gatherings. I took photos of documents when I brought Richard his afternoon coffee. I memorized names, dates, and amounts from conversations I overheard. The evidence was damning. Not just about my parents, but about dozens of other accidents and suicides and natural deaths that had cleared the way for Blackwood developments. They were serial killers hiding behind expensive suits and charity galas. Second, I needed allies. The Blackwoods had enemies. Other developers they had crushed, families of their victims, honest politicians they couldn't buy. I began reaching out to them carefully, anonymously at first, then more directly as I built trust. I met Sarah Martinez, whose husband had died in a construction accident at a Blackwood site after he'd complained about safety violations. I found Tom Wilson, a former city inspector who had been fired for refusing to take bribes from Richard. I connected with journalist Lisa Park, who had been investigating the Blackwoods for years but couldn't get anyone to talk. These people became my secret army. We shared information, coordinated our efforts, and waited for the right moment to strike. Third, I needed to position myself perfectly. I convinced Marcus to give me more responsibility in the business. I want to help the family, I told him with tears in my eyes. Your parents have been so good to me. Let me give back. Soon I had access to financial records, client lists, and development plans. I was invited to high-level meetings. I traveled with Richard to meet with city officials and potential investors. I became indispensable. The irony was delicious. They had killed my parents to steal their land, then welcomed their daughter into the heart of their operation. They had created their own destroyer. A year after I learned the truth, everything was ready. The charity gala was Eleanor's idea. The Blackwood Foundation was hosting its annual fundraiser for underprivileged children. The same foundation they used to launder money and buy political influence. 500 of the city's most powerful people would be there, including the mayor, 3 city council members, and the district attorney. It would be the perfect stage for my revelation. I spent weeks preparing. Every detail had to be perfect. The evidence had to be presented in a way that would be impossible to deny or dismiss. The timing had to be flawless. There would be no second chances. The night of the gala, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and barely recognized myself. I wore a stunning red dress that Eleanor had picked out for me. My hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon. My makeup was flawless. I looked like the perfect daughter-in-law attending her family's triumph. But in my small clutch purse, I carried a flash drive containing 3 years of evidence and a speech that would end the Blackwood dynasty forever. "You look beautiful, darling," Marcus said, appearing behind me in the mirror. He was handsome in his tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile confident. Looking at him, I felt a stab of something that might have been regret. Once I had loved this man. Before I knew what his family was, before I understood that he must have known about my parents' murder, I had genuinely believed we had a future together. Now I saw him clearly, weak, spoiled, complicit in his parents' crimes through willful blindness. "Thank you," I said, turning to face him. "Are you ready for tonight?" "More than ready. Dad says this could be our biggest fundraiser ever. With your help organizing everything, it's going to be perfect." "Perfect." Yes, it would be perfect. Just not in the way he expected. The gala was held at the grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across tables decorated with white orchids and gold accents. The city's elite mingled with champagne glasses, discussing business deals and political campaigns. I moved through the crowd like the perfect hostess I had trained myself to be. I greeted guests, made small talk, and ensured everyone felt welcome. Several people complimented me on the event organization. Eleanor beamed with pride as she introduced me to important donors. "Morgan has been such a blessing to our family," she told the mayor's wife. "We couldn't ask for a better daughter-in-law." I smiled and thanked her graciously, all while my heart hammered against my ribs. In 30 minutes, the evening's program would begin. In 30 minutes, I would destroy everything. Richard took the stage first to welcome the guests and thank them for their support. He spoke about the foundation's mission, about helping children in need, about building a better community. The lies flowed from his mouth like honey. Eleanor followed with a presentation about the foundation's accomplishments over the past year. Photos of smiling children flashed on the screen behind her. Everyone applauded politely. Then it was my turn. This hadn't been planned originally, but a week ago I had suggested that as the newest member of the family, I should say a few words about how much the foundation meant to me. Eleanor had loved the idea. "It will show everyone how perfectly you fit into our family," she had said. I walked to the podium on steady legs, my smile warm and grateful. The audience settled into attentive silence. At the back of the room I could see my secret allies positioned near the exits. Sarah Martinez stood by the main door. Tom Wilson was by the service entrance. Lisa Park sat at a table near the front with her camera ready. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "Thank you so much for being here tonight to support the Blackwood Foundation's important work." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. "When I married into the Blackwood family 3 years ago, I thought I knew what kind of people they were," I continued. "I thought they were generous, caring individuals who wanted to make the world better. I was right about one thing: they definitely wanted to change the world. They just weren't particular about who they had to kill to do it." The applause died. Confused murmurs started in the back of the room. 3 years ago my parents died in what police called a car accident. Brake failure on a rainy night. Very tragic. Very convenient for the Blackwoods, who wanted the 50 acres of prime development land my parents owned. Eleanor started to rise from her seat at the head table, her face pale. Richard grabbed her arm, holding her down, his eyes locked on mine with growing understanding. "But it wasn't an accident," I said, my voice growing stronger. "It was murder. Arranged and paid for by the people who took me in afterward, who comforted me in my grief, who welcomed me into their family with such generous hearts." The room erupted in shocked gasps and angry voices. Security started moving toward the stage, but Tom Wilson and his friends blocked their path. This had all been planned. "The Blackwood family has been murdering people for 20 years, I continued over the noise. Competitors, inspectors, activists, anyone who stood in the way of their developments. They bribe officials, falsify documents, and eliminate obstacles. Human obstacles. "Stop her!" Eleanor shrieked, but her voice was lost in the chaos. I pulled the flash drive from my purse and held it up. "This contains evidence of dozens of murders, hundreds of bribes, and millions of dollars in illegal profits. Financial records, recorded conversations, documented payments to killers. Everything you need to understand what the Blackwood Foundation really funds." Marcus had reached the stage and was climbing the steps toward me. His face was twisted with rage and betrayal. "Morgan, what are you doing? These are lies. You're destroying our family." I looked down at him, this man I had once planned to spend my life with, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "I'm not destroying your family, Marcus. I'm exposing it. The way you exposed mine to brake failure and death." He lunged for me, but Tom Wilson was there, tackling him to the ground. The crowd was in full panic now, some people fleeing toward the exits, others pulling out phones to record the scene. Lisa Park was moving through the chaos with her camera, capturing everything. This would be front-page news by morning. "The police have copies of all evidence," I announced into the microphone. The FBI has copies. The district attorney has copies. Justice is coming for the Blackwood family at last. As if summoned by my words, federal agents began flooding into the ballroom. They moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding the head table where Eleanor and Richard sat frozen in shock. Richard Blackwood, Eleanor Blackwood, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, the lead agent announced. You have the right to remain silent. I watched from the stage as they handcuffed my in-laws. Eleanor was crying now, her perfect makeup running down her cheeks. Richard's face was stone, but his eyes when they met mine were full of shocked recognition. They finally understood what I was. What they had created when they killed my parents and brought me into their home. Marcus was arrested too, along with several other family members and business associates who were at the gala. The charges would be extensive: murder, conspiracy, bribery, racketeering. The Blackwood empire would collapse overnight. As the ballroom emptied and the last of the arrests were made, I stood alone on the stage still holding the microphone. My perfect revenge was complete. My parents were avenged. Justice had been served. So why did I feel so empty? 6 months later, I sat in a coffee shop across from Lisa Park, reading her latest article about the Blackwood trials. The evidence I had gathered had held up perfectly in court. Richard and Eleanor were facing life sentences. Marcus had taken a plea deal but would still spend 20 years in prison. The Blackwood Foundation had been dissolved. Their properties had been seized. Their victims' families were finally getting some measure of justice and compensation. You did it, Lisa said, stirring sugar into her coffee. You brought down one of the most corrupt families in the state. How does it feel? I stared out the window at people walking by with their normal problems and normal lives. How did it feel? Hollow, I said finally. I spent 3 years living a lie, planning their destruction. Now that it's over, I don't know who I am anymore. You're Morgan Barrett, Lisa said gently. The woman who got justice for her parents and dozens of other victims. The woman who had the courage to take on killers and win. But that wasn't completely true, and we both knew it. During the investigation that followed my revelation, more details had emerged. Yes, the Blackwoods had arranged my parents' accident. But Marcus hadn't known. The evidence showed clearly that Richard and Eleanor had kept their son ignorant of their methods. They had used shell companies and intermediaries to keep their hands clean in his eyes. Marcus had been spoiled and weak, but he hadn't been a killer. He had genuinely loved me, and I had destroyed him for his parents' crimes. The woman who had planned perfect revenge for 3 years had made one crucial error. In my hunger for justice, I had become as ruthless as the people I sought to destroy. I had sacrificed an innocent man's life for my satisfaction. I became them, I told Lisa. I lied, manipulated, and destroyed lives to get what I wanted. How does that make me different from the Blackwoods? Intent, Lisa said firmly. You did it for justice, not profit. You did it to stop killers, not to enable them. Maybe she was right. Maybe the end justified the means. Maybe sometimes you have to become a monster to fight monsters. But as I sat there in the coffee shop thinking about Marcus in his prison cell, I wondered if my parents would have wanted this kind of justice. If they would have wanted me to sacrifice my soul for their vengeance. My name is Morgan Barrett, and I got perfect revenge on the people who killed my parents. I destroyed their empire, sent them to prison, and made sure they could never hurt anyone again. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. What they don't tell you is that it might be the only thing you ever taste again.